Imagine being too scared to drive literally 6 minutes across the neighborhood that you've been in for 20 years? They're trying to deport American citizens. Where do you deport a citizen to? Where do you deport somebody who was born here? Equity feels like oppression when you're the oppressor, bro. And so they made a police force out of them. All right, here we go. I'm going to pretend I'm pushing record because that feels right. Okay, I'm pressing record. Boop. Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Howard. Welcome to Different, Not Broken, which is our podcast on exactly that there are a lot of people in this world walking around feeling broken, and the reality is you're just different, and that's fine. I have a rant to do, and I'm so fucking tired of having rants to do. Like, why do people keep lighting basic, human rights and dignities on fire so that I have rants to do? I don't want to have rants to do. I just want to, eat snacks and watch shows about murder. And instead, I have to go on the internet because I don't know what else to do with my hands. Because, what the fuck else am I supposed to do? She used to be my nanny, now she's my assistant, who I do not get through a day without. She's the functioning part of my brain day to day. She lives, maybe 6 minutes from us in a house in another neighborhood. But the neighborhood we live in is considered part of this larger neighborhood in Orlando, and it's gotten very, very large. It's basically become its own community, even though it's part of Orlando proper. She's been showing up to this house nearly every day for almost 8 years, 7.5 years, because she started when my youngest was 2 months old, and she has not left us since, and that child is 7.5 now. So she's been showing up here every single day for that entire time, and every single day, like clockwork, I look out of my front window at 8:58, and her little egg car, she drives a little, we call it an egg. It's like a little Toyota Yaris, and it looks like an egg. We call it the huevo. And anyway, her little egg car parks right outside my window, and I'm like, okay, the day is starting because the functioning part of my brain has arrived. The ways she knows to harass me to get things done, the ways that she makes sure my children have what they need, the ways that she communicates with people without me asking to get things on my behalf. I cannot function without this human, on the other side of this door. I always think that I'm, in here with, all my privacy and stuff, and then I'll walk out, and she will make it very clear that she heard everything I just said and parrot it back to me. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that I have. Anyway, she's allowed to hear everything. She has access to all my emails. If it exists, she's seen it. So I don't need privacy from her, but I certainly don't have it. Anyway, one morning she texted me and she was like, I don't think I'm going to come in today, which has never happened, except for maybe one time where she had a cold. I don't think I'm coming in today. I was like, is everything okay? Because clearly some sky was falling in. I mean, this person lived with us, lived in my house for 2 years during the first 2 years of the pandemic because it was the only way to keep everybody safe and have her, rather than having her, her not showing up was a big deal. I wasn't upset about it, but it was a big deal. And so I was like, is everything okay? She was like, I mean, sort of. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right. But apparently ice was crawling all over our neighborhood. And she was worried that if for some reason she got stopped, that they would grab her. Here's the thing. Aside from the fact that nobody should be worried about that at all, should not be a concern. Full stop. She's a citizen. She's been a citizen her whole life. Her dad's a citizen. She's a citizen. But she looks kind of brown. And her concern was not that they were going to incorrectly assess her citizenship. It was that they weren't going to give a fuck, which is a valid concern, a very valid concern. And so she said, kind of sheepishly, honestly, but she said, do you mind if I just work from home today? And I was like, absolutely. Of course, I don't care. But imagine being too scared to drive literally 6 minutes across the neighborhood that you've been in for 20 years? Maybe more than that? Because there's unnecessary federal agents everywhere, and they have made it their mission to terrorize people based on how they look and based on their lack of quote-unquote compliance. Compliance is a bullshit myth. It's not that I didn't understand what was going on, and it's not that it wasn't miserably troubling to me the whole time. I felt completely powerless. What do you do in that situation? Obviously, she is allowed to stay home if that's what she's concerned about. She can do whatever she wants. She can stay home as long as she needs. But Why should somebody have to stay in their house? Somebody who is... Actually, I don't even care if you're here legally. Why should somebody have to stay in their house because there's an unregulated fake army outside your door who are deployed here not for any reason other than to terrorize people? Why should that be a thing? Why should she be scared to go to work? And, as the resident Mayo sapien of the group, I asked if she wanted me to come pick her up because I would very happily drive her here. And in my 6,000-pound SUV that goes vroom very loudly, because I've reached the point where I'm like, come at me, bro. I will protect the people. It's not just the people in my universe. I will protect whomever because fuck these people. But that was actually before the most recent thing where they shot a ICU nurse in cold blood who was rendering aid. He was rendering aid. They didn't even know he had a firearm with him. He was rendering aid. And then they tried to say after they murdered him and emptied an entire clip into him that he brandished a firearm at him. Except we have video. We have video. They can't even lie about what happened because people know better than to let them breathe in front of them without video. On nearly every occasion that they have stepped out of bounds, there has been video proving that they are outright lying. And this was before that even happened. And again, your status doesn't matter in these situations because it doesn't matter to them. They're saying that they're trying to deal with immigration issues. But if they were trying to deal with immigration issues, there are 10,000 ways to do that without hurting people like cattle and being completely non-discriminatory on who you're grabbing. They don't care. They're trying to deport American citizens. Where do you deport a citizen to? Where do you deport somebody who was born here? It's not deporting if you're sending them to a place they're not from. That's kidnapping. But they don't care. They don't care. It's the threat. It's the attempt to silence. That's all it's about. It's not about the rest of it. There is no rest of it. And the thing that keeps just playing in my head on repeat that I can't shake is that there's this narrative, well, if they had just complied, if they had just obeyed. Obeyed what? There was not a lawful order being made. There was nothing illegal being done. Complying with somebody just because they have a badge is not required when they're not doing anything within the boundaries of their position. You do not have to comply with the police just because they said so. You don't. But the bottom line is, let's say that person didn't comply. Let's say there was actually a lawful order made and that person didn't comply. You're not supposed to empty a magazine full of bullets into a guilty person either. It's not like there's a situation where this is acceptable. Not only was he lawfully carrying a firearm, but he hadn't taken it out of his pocket. The only thing he was brandishing were the requirements of him of being a licensed individual, seeing someone in pain, seeing someone who needed help. He has an ethical obligation to intervene. You're not supposed to just let someone die. He was doing what he's supposed to do, and they emptied a magazine into him for it. And I want to be clear, this is not the first time, and I don't love that there's so much public outrage now when this has happened. I think it's 9 previous times in the last month or something to people who weren't white. And the outrage is around these 2 white individuals, but the outrage needs to go far beyond that. First off, the outrage needs to be not in the fact that they're killing people, but that they are in the position to exist and supported by this administration to do the things they're doing anyway. Baseline, even before somebody gets hurt, we have a big problem. But now people are getting hurt, and instead of it being about these people are in places where they shouldn't be doing things they shouldn't be doing, it's about, well, if you just listened, this would be fine. If you just did what we told you, we won't shoot you. It's like the governmentalization, I don't even know if that's a word, of if you stop making me so mad, I wouldn't hit you. If you have friends right now who are abuse survivors, what is happening in the government feels very familiar to them. Because that's what they're moving the goalposts every time. Every time it's somehow a new version of your fault. When you do what they said the last time, they will find a new way to encroach upon your freedoms because there's a new thing that you've done wrong. Again and again and again until you have no freedoms left. Until you have no ability to take care of yourself, until you are not allowed to move freely in your community until, in the same way that you watch abuse victims lose all their access to money, lose all their access to friends and family, get their phones taken away, get all of these different ways that they could ask for help taken away. That's what they're doing. They're making it so it's silence or death. And if you're not silent, you're being non-compliant. And if you're non-compliant, we can kill you. Or we can come into your house, or we can rip your children out of your arms, or we can try to deport you even though you live here legally. And the thing is, the courts aren't behind them. The courts are ruling against them over and over and over. And so instead of trying to do it through any legal means or any, not that they were doing it legally before, but instead of trying to do it through the processes that do exist, because they keep getting shot down for trying to use those, they've just decided to go for full violence. Why not? It's a hard time to exist. And I don't want to make it sound like the field that I am in is harder to be in than any other, because I don't think that's true. Though it seems like kind of a fun time to be in federal law enforcement if you're an untrained, fragile little man. That does seem like they're having fun. They might be the only people having fun right now. But it is such a difficult time to be in mental health right now. Because, like, what the fuck are you supposed to say to people? Like, do we have a mental health crisis? Or do we have the world is falling apart around us and everything's terrible and I can't pay my bills crisis? There's no medication for that. There's no amount of therapy that's going to fix the actual world around you. And it's not to say we can't help. There are ways that we can help. Like, what do we do? How do we help people in any way that actually matters? There are some days where I just sit around and I'm like, I don't even know what to do with my hands. Because I'm over here telling people that we want to help them. And the reality is, I don't know how much we can actually do. I don't know how much we can actually do. No idea. And the reality is we can do something. There's always something that we can do. As trained professionals, the therapists, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, etc., who I work with, they have arsenals of toolkits of ways that they can try to help you process these things, help you work through these things. Those things exist. And that's not to say don't rely on your mental health practitioners. But man, it feels so futile to wake up every day and run a business or try to run a business that is focused on making people's lives better or trying to make their lives more livable. And then the reality is on the outside is this toxic hellscape that I don't realistically know we can do anything about. I mean, I know we can't do anything about it. Not in that capacity. Not from a mental health perspective. We can protest, we can write our senators, we can write our congresspeople, we can be loudmouths on the internet, we can help people find community, we can build other communities, we can try to find safe spaces, we can do all of that, and all of that is helpful. But all of that is stuff that we shouldn't have to do. We shouldn't be doing things to protect people against their own government. And that's what we're doing right now. We're spending time and energy and resources to try to protect people from their own government because one sad, scared little man with giant ankles and tiny hands was given the keys to the kingdom. His followers see no limit to the power that he's allowed to have. And so he surrounded himself by an army of sad, scared little fragile men who feel oppressed by the existence of other people who are allowed to exist. That's the nature of their oppression. These other people are allowed to exist, and therefore I am threatened by them, and it oppresses me. Equity feels like oppression when you're the oppressor, bro. And so they made a police force out of them. You're not supposed to empty a magazine full of bullets into guilty people either. There's some dude bro on the internet who said, you're oversimplifying it. You're taking all of the nuance out of law enforcement and what it is to have those jobs. And these are people who were giving orders and they were just following orders. The people who enforced the Nazi agenda, you know what we called them? Nazis. These are grown people who are making choices. And signing an employment contract does not mean that you have a responsibility to stand by silent while one of your colleagues murders someone in front of you and then reinforce the lie that it was the fault of the person who died. If the reality is that these are people who got put in a bad situation by bad federal orders that they didn't realize were going to be their responsibility, then they shouldn't be following them. It's illegal to enforce an illegal order. You're still breaking the law. You can't cop out and say, well, I'm just doing my job. Yeah, so were Nazi enforcers. And as the descendant of Holocaust survivors, that doesn't sit right with me. If you're scared, if you're overwhelmed, if you feel helpless, if you feel powerless, That's very reasonable. Entirely reasonable. And that's the goal. The goal is to make you feel so powerless that there is nothing else that you can do but sit and let them do what they want. Now, that doesn't mean that today has to be the day you fight back. It doesn't mean that you have to go get in a picket line for a protest. It doesn't mean you have to figure out how to process through this. But you are not doing anything wrong. There is nothing wrong with you if the things going on in this world are so fucking overwhelming that you're finding yourself feeling completely inept at the things that you do every day, feeling underproductive, feeling like you can't catch up, feeling completely burdened. There is this concept of allostatic load, which is the things around you that put pressure on you. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were lots of people who weren't working, who were furloughed, who didn't have a lot of responsibilities, and they just reported feeling exhausted all the time. They weren't doing anything. They weren't job searching. I don't say that critically. They weren't doing anything because there wasn't anything to be done. They were watching TV, they were baking sourdough, they were doing all of this very minimal stuff and would still crash out every day and want to nap all the time because that's all that they could do. And it's because the allostatic load, the just amount of environmental pressure and worry and grief and things that are happening around you is so draining that you feel like you have been working 80-hour weeks when in reality you've been staring at the TV. Because just the existence of stress puts stress on the body. The allostatic load of this situation is completely unmanageable. So if you, instead of bouncing out of bed and going to the gym like you normally do, you're exhausted and you don't feel like working, that's the reality of a hyper-stressful situation. And if you are having trouble finding the motivation because there's this thing lingering in the universe and maybe it doesn't affect you personally, but it affects you just by existing, maybe you're not in Minnesota and you didn't know somebody that's been harmed, but the idea of it happening is enough to hurt you. That's how these things work. That's realistic. That happens. So you have to give yourself time to process and grieve and figure out what the next step is. And the next step might not be for a little while because you need time. That's realistic. You can figure out your plan of attack, whatever that is, without jumping on a picket line today, without jumping on a protest line today. Now, if you want to do that, if that feels productive to you, if you want to be very active about it, I support you in that too. There's local protests almost everywhere. There's organizations that are putting together response campaigns. I've said this over and over. If we really want to find out what these people are up to, we just need to organize a group of Gen X moms with a Google account. And they will find every skeleton in the closet of every one of these politicians who has facilitated this. And we will get them out of office post-haste. Because clearly there's something about every one of them that they don't want somebody else to find out because they have compromised all of their supposed ethics for this. But if anybody wants to put together that army, I will very happily facilitate because I am certain that a couple of pissed off besties in a room with some margaritas will identify every single thing that we need to get these human piles of excrement out of office. But the reason you feel terrorized is because this is terrorism. That's why you feel terrorized. And so there is nothing wrong with you if this is hard for you. There's nothing wrong with you. There's lots wrong with what's happening in our federal government. There's lots wrong with what's happening in Minnesota, literally outside in my neighborhood. Lots wrong. But your processing of it is not the problem. And you have to do that however your brain and your body need to so that you can, I don't even want to say get back to normal, because what the fuck is normal? How do you get back to normal when we have a modern Gestapo invading our cities? But so that you can get through it. And if you can find community and a group who can support you when you need to be supported, that's going to be the key to whatever the next step is. Maybe it's being vocally outspoken. Maybe it's going to protests. Maybe it's running for office. Fucking run for office. We need more people like you. Please run for office. But whatever it is, if getting there seems insurmountable, it's because you feel terrorized because you're being terrorized. That's the point. That's their goal. That's what they want. And I'm sorry for that. And I'm sorry you feel that way. Hello, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with us today. I have a very special guest with us. This is somebody who I am very lucky that I get to work with almost every day, who I have worked with for about the last year, is an incredible therapist who brings the most lovely depth of experience, both lived and employment based, I guess is the best way to put it. Fantastic intersection of all the things. It makes her, aside from the fact that she is just like inherently an interesting person, it makes her just fantastically
Mhm.
interesting. So glad to have my lovely friend Maya here. Maya, do you want to say hi?
Hi. Hello, world.
Tell us a little bit about your background and what you do every day, and maybe some of the things that you know I find fascinating.
Originally from Oklahoma City, born and raised. I use the word raised loosely. And then I moved to Chicago when I was 26 by myself via Craigslist. Yes, I would not suggest that today, kiddos. But it was very rewarding. And I feel like that's where I grew up. And that's where I got to really figure out a sense of myself without the background noise of politics and family. I've always had an interest in psychology. And I'll admit it was piqued by the movie Silence of the Lambs. I watched it in high school. I was like, that's fascinating. So I got my BA at DePaul University in Chicago, and I also got my master in education there as well. It was in clinical mental health counseling, and I've done that for about 6 years. And I've learned so much from my clients, just as they've learned from me, which I think that needs to be shared more often. My main focus has been LGBTQ plus with the intersection of BIPOC people. One, that's my intersectional identity. And I remember how hard it was for me growing up with all that shame and fear of just being myself. And then growing up in the Baptist church made it a lot harder. I get a little tearful, but I have healed from it. So it's just based on my experience of being told that being homosexual back then is worse than a child molester, a pedophile, a murderer. I'm glad I took the time to really get to know myself when I was in Chicago. I never felt more seen and more uplifted and loved. And that's also where I met my wife. And that's what has motivated me to switch for religious trauma. I had no idea how much of that is still going on in our world. And now I bet it's even more heightened with the political climate. I will try to keep the shade to a minimum.
You
But
don't have to.
okay, so
There's
Cheeto
no
and cheese,
requirement.
basically. COVID variant number 247 is a part of that big religious conflict, right? He's had so many changes in identity, and unfortunately, conservative, rigid, oppressive system of religion is now having a louder voice than it was before.
What does your wife do for a living?
And ironically, she's a pastor. So that's how we met. So I was on the board of trustees at a church that she came to after I joined it a year later. And the reason why I'll say I joined that church, and it's Holy Covenant in Chicago, it's one of the most affirming churches I've ever been to. Before that, my relationship with God was just me and my own. And then I went to a place where I could actually feel the love and acceptance. So stayed. A year later, we had a new pastor come in. I'll admit I Googled her to see if I could get to know a little bit about her before she started, and I was impressed. And it's funny, she'll probably kill me for sharing this, but when we first met, it was at a trustees meeting, and I go to introduce myself, try to be friendly. Her first words, "Aren't you a little young to be on the trustees committee?" And I was like, "I'm gonna let that slide." But then we got to know each other, we built a friendship, and then we fell in love. And I never thought someone of her stature, especially in the church, could love someone like me. It's not because I don't think I'm lovable, it's because I'm a heathen. And I didn't know if that would go over well, but it did, and it still does. I'm honored to be the type of pastor's wife my own identity, which we've had to deal with that in her new church here. They expect me to bake cookies and be nice and take up all their crap and internalize their work and liberal work that need to be done. And I love that. I'm like, I have a career. I'll attend some services. I'll support my wife. I'll say, I think my identity as a pastor's wife is based on Medea and Maya Angelou. So it's not typical.
I say this as a relatively agnostic Jewish person, right?
Mhm.
Like definitely Jewish, believe in something, don't spend a whole lot of time figuring out what it is.
Mhm.
But I also did not have a particularly traumatic faith-based upbringing. There was a period of my life spent in an evangelical Christian cult, which is another story for another day,
I can't wait to
and
hear
did
about
very much have it. Right, exactly. But it is fascinating to me that despite all of this kind of negativity toward who you are that came out of your faith-based upbringing, that you found your way, you were open to faith as an adult once you got out of that. Was that a process, or did you have to, was there healing that had to be done, or was it just finding the right place that made you feel seen and then the rest just kind of fell into place?
I think the healing was done in the process of accepting that I can have a different relationship with God versus what people kept telling me. And I had to find that relationship outside of organized religion for a while. And that's one of the reasons why I started that group is to help people recognize faith and religion can look any way you need it to. I even tell my clients, you can believe in anything, but it's helpful to believe in something as you navigate a very hard process of healing through therapy, kind of like myself. So I tell people you can believe in a rock, tree, leaf, dog, cat, whatever you need. But we do need something outside of ourselves to take on all of the stress and shame and worry that we tend to keep in. So even if it's believing in community, it's just making that connection because there's a lot of divisiveness, unfortunately. So when I piloted my group, what would Career Jesus do? Number one, I knew I was pushing buttons. I've gotten to that age in life. I don't give a shit. Just gonna call it out. And I also did that too, so queer people knew that there are options. And if you decide to have faith, it can look any way, but you can still build community. And I guess looking back is based on the ideal of we are the world, we are children. Knowing that this day and time, it's important to be able to connect with people, even if they seem different from you. Because at the end of the day, as humans, we all have something in common. It just takes time to see it. And a lot of that is acceptance.
One of the things that I find people kind of verbalize to me as they leave a very faith-based upbringing, I'm not advocating for anybody to go find faith. And I think if you listen to, we just recently did an episode with Libby
Mm.
Alders, she's a chaplain. First off, I need to have you two on an episode together and just
Yes,
let you do like battle bots because it's gonna be great. Anyway,
I love it.
but she has a very similar vibe to yours, and we talked a lot about what it's like to find a faith tradition, and I'm not necessarily an advocate for it, but I do think
Mhm.
the thing that we don't verbalize enough when people are processing through faith-based trauma or religious trauma is that there are a lot of bad things that can come out of organized religion, and I am,
Yes,
like, the
yes.
first to talk about those things. But people don't realize that separating from that often represents a lack of community. And if you don't
Mhm.
find a way to replace that community, that's often what you're grieving.
Exactly. And that's one of the really most important goals of the group. So when I got to pilot, I had, or we had 5 people from different backgrounds, including Catholicism, Methodist. And so, one thing I like to lift up to, I guess if you want to get technical, is social discernment theory. So, that's a way to look at scripture or those oppressive messages to reclaim them and reframe them into something that's meaningful and that brings about love and connection. So, but back to the group, we brought up the topic of abortion, which we all know is very controversial regarding faith, political, whatever. And there was someone who identified as Catholic. And by the way, most of them were actually were all queer and BIPOC. And this person was very kind and said, I accept that other people feel differently, but I still connect to my Catholic faith and believe in pro life. And I was surprised that the other people in the call actually took the time to embrace that versus critique it. And it ended up being a really good, deep conversation. So that's kind of something I've always wanted to do again, is just bring some of those people that are different together.
And there's incredibly powerful messages there on how, like, queer people are not a monolith. There is all kinds of variation in their belief structures. And it's one of the reasons why I love that we have so much focus on, I think inclusion means a lot of things.
Mhm.
And a lot of people think finding inclusive spaces means you're going to find a space that is completely outside of the faith world because faith worlds are not inclusive.
Right.
And that's the reality for a lot of people, and I get that.
Mhm.
But it also represents this nucleus of community for so many people that they lose. And by finding a way back to it or finding something similar that does something, similar for them, I know we've seen a huge amount of impact that can have on people. And as you said, it could be 75 different faith traditions in the same place.
Yeah.
But reinforcing that, like, there's nothing in this book that says you're not welcome here. There are people who say you're not welcome here, but there is nothing in the thing that actually drives our decision making that says you're not welcome here.
And that's really big focus for Kelly because she piloted a queer Bible study, which that was the first time I ever wanted to go to Bible study. No shade. Because before it seemed like very fucking boring and people just throwing scripture back and forth. And I was like, why? No. But she did that and she let me help her, like, guide it. And it was just astonishing how a lot of people in our society who are not part of the privileged and the predominant don't know if they have the power of choice or even to challenge things. And so we brought up the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and people were shocked to hear that it's actually not about sin against homosexuality. It's actually about something very different. I mean, it was a messed up situation, but it's people use it as a weapon, and it's really not true. So we did a few more things like that, and people were just like shocked. Number one, that they could just take the space to reflect and make it their own. Number two, there was still some fear of, like, am I going to hell if I challenge this? And we had to help them sit in the space of, like, no. The thing that gets lost in religion for me is the power of choice. Because a lot of times people are told that if you lean into choice, then you're going against God and you'll probably end up doing Satan's work, right? So not to trust yourself. And so I like to uplift that, not only in this group, but in therapy too. I mean, I work with a lot of people who are like, I thought I had to do this, I thought I had to shrink myself. And it's not true.
So, quick story before we're done. One of my favorite television shows of all time is The West Wing. And there is an episode in the second season of The West Wing called Two Cathedrals.
Yes, I lied. It was a sin. I've committed many sins. Have I displeased you, you feckless thug? 3.8 million new jobs, that wasn't good. Bailed out Mexico, increased foreign trade, 30 million new acres of land for conservation. Put Mendoza on the bench. We're not fighting a war. I've raised 3 children. That's not enough to buy me out of the doghouse? Hey, Credo Madeo Pio.
If you haven't seen the episode, go watch it. It's in the second season.
will.
It's incredible. It's one of the best hours of television that has ever happened. And I can quote the speech almost verbatim, which is probably a mental illness all on its own. But The thing that I love most about that, because the president in this storyline is a very devout Catholic who wanted to be priest when he grew up and then just happened to meet his wife in college and decided not to. And like, this is a big deal for this character. But the thing that I love the most about it is before they filmed the scene, which they actually filmed in the National Cathedral,
Oh, wow.
they pulled aside the priest who runs all of it I don't know how that works, but the priest who runs all of it and says, just so you know, he's going to say some really awful stuff about God and he's going to do it in your space. And we want to make sure that you know that and you're okay with it. And the priest was like, I know, and I'm so excited
That's deep.
because he was like, because his take on it was like, you're supposed to argue. You're supposed to have questions. You're supposed to, you're going to be angry. Things are going to happen and you're not going to understand it. And so I guess the story, the lore, obviously I wasn't there, is that this priest was like standing in the wings the whole time, just transfixed by this very real, very human motion, watching the supposedly very powerful man take all of his anger out on God because he was like, that's real. That's realistic.
Yes.
You're not supposed to.
Yes.
So anyway, watch the episode. It's amazing. But it's also very much the same idea that, you know, sometimes you're going to be mad because you don't have all the answers. And that doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong.
What you mentioned is something I also bring up in therapy with clients. Ask questions. And ask me questions during the consultation. I don't care. That's your right. And if you don't want to work with me, you move on. Just be free to ask your therapist any questions you need to make sure you feel safe and aligned. And yes, when people get mad in session, I love it. It's an emotion. And it's emotion that people are told that they're not supposed to have. And I remind people anger is justified. It's like DBT. All emotions are valid. They just get dysregulated from time to time. We don't need to go on that rant. But anger, for me, indicates the need that something needs to change. There is righteous anger. It does come up for a reason.
That's such a good place to stop off at. Thank you so much for spending time with us. It has been a delight to have you here.
Shout out to my neurodivergent peeps. I love you and hope to work with more of you moving forward.
And now we'll go to Allison, who has this week's small talk.
All right. So we have a question from Hannah in Burlington, Vermont. I feel like I live in my head more than my body. I forget to eat, forget to drink water, forget that I'm tired until I'm wrecked. Is that dissociation, burnout, just being bad at being human? Where do you even start with reconnecting?
So as a non-clinician, I cannot tell you if that's dissociation or not. You should definitely talk to a mental health professional about that. But what I can say is the world is a toxic hellscape, and it is very, very hard to exist right now. And so if this is something that is relatively new, if it is something that just feels like exhaustion, there's a lot to be exhausted by, and no one can fault you for that. So you are probably doing the most human thing, which is feeling your feelings, even if you're not entirely sure what they are. That said, one of the first signs of depression is lack of interest in doing things and kind of lack of participation in life. One of the earlier signs of depression, I should say. So, like, maybe there is somebody you should talk to just to make sure that actually, like, I'm not even sure what to make sure of. Make sure that you're just having a reasonable response to the toxic hellscape that is happening outside. That doesn't seem better. But, like, maybe there is something that a mental health professional can help with. Maybe you need some time with friends. Maybe you need to develop some community around you who can kind of give you some motivation to do those things. I'll be honest, I'm the type, I have done this my whole life. I forget to eat all the time. I forget to go pee all the time. I will be like, oh, I have to go to the bathroom, and then find myself sitting at my computer 2 hours later going, did I ever pee? Which, by the way, like, not great for your kidneys. Don't do that. It's probably not great for your brain either if your brain is just like, has a hole in it that your bodily functions just fall through. But I've done that my whole life, and I still participate in life fairly consistently. Not in any way that requires like socialization or shoes, but, you know, still doing most of the things I need to do. But if it, you know, if it's bothering you, if it feels incorrect, if it feels like you're missing out on something that you need access to, maybe it is time to talk to somebody. Or if this is relatively new and sudden onset, and it is entirely reasonable to have that reaction to the things that are happening around you in the world. Like, this shit's heavy. And it's not the kind of heavy that you can just put down. It's just heavy. Thanks for being here, guys. Have a good day. Love you, mean it. Because my husband walked into my office and took his phone while I was sitting in front of my computer and just put it in front of my face. I was like, can we go get that? And I was like, yeah. And that's how we ended up with a puppy.